It was a Saturday, one of those rare moments when the universe allowed everything to slow down. The sun filtered through the curtains, and the sound of a distant lawnmower hummed in the background. I had collapsed onto the couch with a beer in hand, letting the stress from the week slip away. My wife was beside me, curled up, her soft breathing in sync with the muted voices from the TV. These were the moments I lived for, small pockets of quiet where life didn't feel like an endless to-do list. But lately, I'd felt like a stranger in my own life. There was a shadow between us, something subtle but unshakable. I'd come home from work, ready to collapse, and find the house in complete disarray, like something had swept through it, an energy I couldn't quite identify. Towels in odd places, sheets twisted on the bed as if they'd been hurriedly rearranged, the faint whiff of perfume that didn't belong to either of us. When I asked if anyone had come over during the day, she always said no, dismissing my questions with a casual smile. She was an artist, after all. I lose track of time when I paint, she'd say, and that would be the end of it. At first, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But doubt has a way of gnawing at you, slow and steady, until it becomes impossible to ignore. It was the small things, really, her sudden need for space, the way she'd glance at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, or the way she now seemed more relieved than happy whenever I left for work. I felt like I was intruding in my own home, as though she was living two lives, one that existed comfortably without me. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress could make anyone paranoid, right? But the signs kept building little by little. A couple of months ago, I'd started noticing how she'd fumble to explain why the bed smelled different, or why the shower was still wet in the evenings, even though she claimed she hadn't used it. On several occasions, I came home to find the dining table covered with empty wine glasses, 2, sometimes 3. Yet she always insisted she'd been alone. Today was the day I decided I'd had enough of second-guessing my own instincts. I knew something was off, but without proof, there was no way to confront her. And so, after lying on the couch for a while, I hatched a plan. I casually mentioned that I was going to visit my friend Danny, an excuse I often used, and slipped out of the house. But instead of going to Danny's, I drove straight to an electronics store across town. The cameras I bought were discreet, designed for home security, but they would serve a different purpose today. They cost more than I was comfortable spending, but peace of mind doesn't come cheap. When I returned home, the place was empty, just as I'd hoped. My wife had left, probably to one of those mysterious errands she never felt the need to explain in detail. I seized the moment, carefully installing the cameras in hidden corners of the bedroom, the living room, even the hallway. They were the kind with audio, tiny, impossible to notice unless you knew exactly where to look. I tested them all, my heart pounding in my chest as if I were the one doing something wrong. Everything worked perfectly. The audio was clear, the video crisp. I could monitor everything remotely from my phone. Once I finished, I threw the packaging into the back of my closet and returned to the couch, my pulse finally slowing. The cameras were in place. Now all I had to do was wait. When my wife returned that evening, she carried a bag filled with brushes and paints. She said she'd been at her friend's studio, picking up some supplies. She seemed relaxed, cheerful even, and kissed my cheek as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But I noticed the faint hint of whiskey on her breath, something she didn't mention. We sat together and watched a movie, her head resting on my shoulder. It was familiar, comfortable, almost enough to make me feel guilty for what I'd done. But then an idea struck me, something simple, yet revealing. During a quiet scene in the movie, I made a show of answering my phone, pretending it was my grandfather on the other end. "He's not doing well," I said, loud enough for her to hear. "I think I need to drive down to the village. Probably stay overnight." When I glanced at her, I saw it, the tiniest flicker of relief flashing across her face. She masked it quickly, of course, offering a concerned smile, asking if I needed her to come with me. But it was too late. That moment told me everything I needed to know. I packed a small bag, grabbing a few tools to make the story convincing. She helped me load the car, even kissed me goodbye, her smile warm and genuine. At least, that's how it would have seemed to anyone else. But I knew better now. Instead of heading to the village, I drove to a nearby hotel and checked in. I set up the camera feeds on my phone and lay back on the bed, staring at the screen, waiting for the truth to unfold. For the first hour, nothing happened. My wife painted in the living room, humming softly to herself. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was wrong, if all the suspicion and doubt had been a product of my own imagination. Then, just as I was beginning to relax, she finished painting. I watched as she set the brush down, wiped her hands on a cloth, and reached for her phone. And that's when the truth started to unravel. She dialed a number, one that wasn't saved in her contacts, and her voice changed, slipping into something playful, flirtatious. "Hey, Brian," she said, her tone light and teasing. "I'm alone today. Want to come over and have some fun?" The sound of her laughter filled the room, soft and intoxicating. And just like that, the carefully constructed life I thought we shared began to crumble. I lay on the hotel bed, phone in hand, eyes glued to the camera feed. My heart was pounding, every breath shaky as I watched her move with purpose. After the phone call, she set her painting tools aside, a different kind of focus settling over her. Something in her expression had shifted, like a mask slipping off, revealing the real person beneath. She wasn't just getting comfortable for the night. She was preparing. For him. For them. She hummed a tune while gathering her things, her movements deliberate but casual, like she'd done this before. She headed into the bathroom, and when she reappeared, I watched her sit at the vanity, applying makeup, foundation, eyeliner, the works. Not the kind of effort she made when we were just spending the evening together. This was something else entirely. A ritual almost. She even shaved her legs, armpits, and bikini area, and her reflection in the mirror was calm and focused, as if there was nothing wrong, nothing inappropriate, with inviting another man into our bed. At that point, I still thought it would just be Brian. That was bad enough. A betrayal that was already twisting a knife deep into my gut. But then the doorbell rang, and my world shattered. On the screen, I saw Brian arrive, all smiles and easy confidence, but he wasn't alone. Two other men followed behind him, towering figures with broad shoulders and bodies that looked carved from stone. They were huge, muscles rippling under tight t-shirts, their presence dominating the small space of my living room. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just some affair. It was something darker. The three of them took their time getting comfortable, as if they owned the place. They sat on the couch, relaxed, legs spread, laughing and chatting like they'd done this 100 times before. Whiskey was poured into glasses, and for the next half hour, they just talked. The conversation seemed casual on the surface, sports, work, inside jokes, but I knew better. I knew where this was heading. And yet, what angered me most was her demeanor. She laughed with them, her smile radiant and easy, the kind of joy I hadn't seen from her in months. As if their presence brought out a version of her I no longer recognized. This was who she was now, a woman who could play the role of a loving wife during the day and someone else entirely at night. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. The minutes crawled by, and every passing second was like a hammer to my heart. I clenched my phone so tightly I could hear the plastic casing creak, my jaw locked in silent fury. I wanted to scream, to punch something to stop this from happening. But all I could do was watch, paralyzed by the impossibility of the situation unfolding before me. Then she excused herself, and I watched as she headed to the shower. My chest tightened, breath growing shallow. I knew what was coming, but that didn't prepare me for the gut-wrenching reality of it. When she stepped back into the living room, my mind went blank. She was completely naked, her skin glistening from the shower, water droplets sliding down her bare shoulders. She walked out with a casualness that made my blood boil, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This wasn't the woman I married. The person on that screen, the one walking so freely in front of those men, was a stranger. My wife was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. That was when something inside me snapped. I hurled the hotel remote across the room, the plastic cracking as it collided with the wall. The sound echoed in the tiny space, but it didn't stop the flood of rage crashing through me. I grabbed the lamp on the bedside table and smashed it to the ground. Glass shattered, scattering across the carpet, But the noise only fueled my anger. I wanted to destroy everything, to make the room look like the chaos I felt inside. I flipped the table, sent chairs flying, tore down the curtains, anything to expel the fury I couldn't direct at her. I was trapped in this hotel room, forced to watch the woman I loved betray me in the worst way imaginable. And the only thing I could control was the destruction around me. I wanted to punch the walls, to scream until my throat bled, to tear the room apart piece by piece. But nothing I did could touch what was happening on that screen. No amount of destruction would stop what I knew was about to unfold back home. The three men sat there, watching her as if she were a prize, something they were about to claim. They didn't rush. They savored the moment, knowing they had all the time in the world. And she, standing there, made no attempt to cover herself. She was inviting it, welcoming it. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a vice. I slammed my fist into the wall, the dull thud of impact offering no relief. My knuckles throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me. This was more than infidelity. It was a violation, a complete and utter dismantling of everything we'd built together. And the worst part? I couldn't stop it. I was miles away, powerless, reduced to nothing but an observer of my own humiliation. I sank onto the bed, surrounded by the wreckage I created. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone again, staring at the screen with a mixture of disbelief and helpless rage. The video feed showed them still sitting, still drinking, but now with a shift in the air, a tension that hinted at what was to come. I knew I should have turned it off, thrown the phone against the wall, erased it all from my mind. But I couldn't. Some sick part of me needed to see this through, to know exactly how deep her betrayal ran. And so, I sat there in the wrecked hotel room, the weight of reality crashing down on me like a tidal wave, waiting for the night to unfold in all its terrible glory. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in my shaking hands, paralyzed as the scene on the screen unfolded. The men, those massive figures, began to strip one by one, revealing bodies chiseled with strength, exuding confidence. My wife stood there, waiting for them, not a hint of hesitation in her posture. Instead, there was excitement, hunger. She bit her lip and smiled, like this was what she'd been waiting for all along. My stomach churned. I wanted to turn the feed off, to erase the images already seared into my brain, but I couldn't. I was glued to it, consumed by disbelief and fury. One of the men stepped toward her, and she welcomed him with open arms. When the others joined in, my heart broke into pieces. And then it started. The sounds, her moans, hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't the sounds of someone conflicted or ashamed. No, they were the sounds of someone completely lost in the moment, enjoying it. Her face twisted in ecstasy, her body shaking with pleasure. Every part of her seemed to crave it, and that realization shattered me. I thought I knew my wife, thought I understood her, but seeing her like this, like someone I'd never met, someone who didn't care about the man she'd sworn to love, it broke something inside me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a complete betrayal, something so deep it defied words. And the way she looked at those men, it was as if I never existed. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the feed, but I couldn't stop watching. Each sound, each movement felt like a dagger driven deeper into my soul. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I wiped the tears away, unable to believe what I was seeing. My wife wasn't just being unfaithful. She was enjoying it more than she ever had with me. At that moment, anger and sorrow mingled into a storm that threatened to tear me apart. My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached, and tears streamed down my face, hot and bitter. I could barely breathe, each gasp shallow and ragged. For a fleeting moment, the thought crossed my mind. What if I just go there, storm in and stop this myself? But fear gripped me just as quickly. The three of them were huge, much stronger than me. If I showed up there alone, they wouldn't just laugh at me, they'd crush me. Maybe worse. I imagined the humiliation of being overpowered, of becoming another victim in that twisted scene. I knew I couldn't face them, Not like this. So I sat there, trapped in that hotel room, forced to watch my wife's betrayal in real time, powerless to stop any of it. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing uncontrollably. This was a nightmare, one I never imagined I'd have to endure. How had things fallen apart so completely? How had I become this helpless bystander in my own life? But in the midst of my tears, a thought flickered. An idea. A way to end this nightmare. Not just tonight, but permanently. I couldn't fight them physically, but I could outthink them. I could use this against them. And suddenly, the helplessness I felt began to shift into something colder, something calculated. I sat up straighter, my mind sharpening with purpose. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about justice. No, more than that, it was about destruction. If I couldn't physically tear them apart, I would do it another way. I would dismantle their lives, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I thought back to the moments I'd returned home after work. How disorganized the house had been. The mess I had tried to ignore. Now I knew the truth. Those chaotic scenes weren't accidents. They were the aftermath of these nights. Nights when my wife invited strangers into our bed, when she transformed our home into a playground for her twisted fantasies. The rage inside me boiled hotter, but this time I embraced it. I let it fuel me. No more crying. No more helplessness. It was time to take control. The plan began to take shape in my mind, piece by piece, every detail falling into place. I glanced back at the camera feed one more time, watching as they indulged in their twisted celebration, unaware of the trap I was about to spring. They thought they were invincible, that there were no consequences for what they were doing. But they were wrong, so terribly wrong, and soon they would know it. I lay on the hotel bed, phone in hand, eyes glued to the camera feed. My heart was pounding, every breath shaky as I watched her move with purpose. After the phone call, she set her painting tools aside, a different kind of focus settling over her. Something in her expression had shifted, like a mask slipping off, revealing the real person beneath. She wasn't just getting comfortable for the night. She was preparing. For him. For them. She hummed a tune while gathering her things, her movements deliberate but casual, like she'd done this before. She headed into the bathroom, and when she reappeared, I watched her sit at the vanity, applying makeup, foundation, eyeliner, the works. Not the kind of effort she made when we were just spending the evening together. This was something else entirely. A ritual almost. She even shaved her legs and underarms, her reflection in the mirror one of calm concentration, as though there was nothing wrong, nothing out of place about inviting another man into our bed. At that point, I still thought it would just be Brian. That was bad enough, a betrayal that was already twisting a knife deep into my gut. But then the doorbell rang, and my world shattered. On the screen, I saw Brian arrive, all smiles and easy confidence, but he wasn't alone. Two other men followed behind him, towering figures with broad shoulders and bodies that looked carved from stone. They were huge, muscles rippling under tight t-shirts, their presence dominating the small space of my living room. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just some affair. It was something darker. The three of them took their time getting comfortable, as if they owned the place. They sat on the couch, relaxed, legs spread, laughing and chatting like they'd done this 100 times before. Whiskey was poured into glasses, and for the next half hour, they just talked. The conversation seemed casual on the surface, sports, work, inside jokes, but I knew better. I knew where this was heading. And yet, what angered me most was her demeanor. She laughed with them, her smile radiant and easy, the kind of joy I hadn't seen from her in months. As if their presence brought out a version of her I no longer recognized. This was who she was now, a woman who could play the role of a loving wife during the day and someone else entirely at night. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. The minutes crawled by, and every passing second was like a hammer to my heart. I clenched my phone so tightly I could hear the plastic casing creak, my jaw locked in silent fury. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to stop this from happening. But all I could do was watch, paralyzed by the impossibility of the situation unfolding before me. Then she excused herself, and I watched as she headed to the shower. My chest tightened, breath growing shallow. I knew what was coming, but that didn't prepare me for the gut-wrenching reality of it. When she stepped back into the living room, my mind went blank. She was completely naked, her skin glistening from the shower, water droplets sliding down her bare shoulders. She walked out with a casualness that made my blood boil, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This wasn't the woman I married. The person on that screen, the one walking so freely in front of those men, was a stranger. My wife was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. That was when something inside me snapped. I hurled the hotel remote across the room, the plastic cracking as it collided with the wall. The sound echoed in the tiny space, but it didn't stop the flood of rage crashing through me. I grabbed the lamp on the bedside table and smashed it to the ground. Glass shattered, scattering across the carpet, but the noise only fueled my anger. I wanted to destroy everything to make the room look like the chaos I felt inside. I flipped the table, sent chairs flying, tore down the curtains. Anything to expel the fury I couldn't direct at her. I was trapped in this hotel room, forced to watch the woman I loved betray me in the worst way imaginable. And the only thing I could control was the destruction around me. I wanted to punch the walls, to scream until my throat bled, to tear the room apart piece by piece. But nothing I did could touch what was happening on that screen. No amount of destruction would stop what I knew was about to unfold back home. The three men sat there, watching her as if she were a prize, something they were about to claim. They didn't rush. They savored the moment, knowing they had all the time in the world. And she, standing there, made no attempt to cover herself. She was inviting it, welcoming it. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a vice. I slammed my fist into the wall, the dull thud of impact offering no relief. My knuckles throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me. This was more than infidelity. It was a violation, a complete and utter dismantling of everything we'd built together. And the worst part? I couldn't stop it. I was miles away, powerless, reduced to nothing but an observer of my own humiliation. I sank onto the bed, surrounded by the wreckage I'd created. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone again, staring at the screen with a mixture of disbelief and helpless rage. The video feed showed them still sitting, still drinking, but now with a shift in the air, a tension that hinted at what was to come. I knew I should have turned it off, thrown the phone against the wall, erased it all from my mind. But I couldn't. Some sick part of me needed to see this through, to know exactly how deep her betrayal ran. And so, I sat there in the wrecked hotel room, the weight of reality crashing down on me like a tidal wave, waiting for the night to unfold in all its terrible glory. I sat in the wrecked hotel room, my mind buzzing with anger and a cold clarity. Watching the betrayal unfold on my phone had been more than I could bear, but now I knew exactly what I had to do. I couldn't stop what had already happened, but I could make sure they paid for it. All of them. My wife, those men, none of them would walk away from this untouched. My hands steadied as I dialed the police. I kept my voice calm, collected. "Yes, officer," I said. "I just got a notification from my home security system. There are 3 unknown men inside my house. I think they may be armed." I let the words sink in, ensuring the gravity of what I was implying without explicitly lying. The dispatcher assured me officers would arrive immediately. I gave my address and hung up. As soon as the call ended, a wave of emotion surged through me. Rage, betrayal, humiliation. But there was also satisfaction. The truth was no longer my burden to carry alone. Soon, the whole world would know. I jumped into my car and sped toward home, the streets blurring past me. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. I imagined the look on my wife's face when everything came crashing down. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to expose them. Publicly, painfully, irreversibly. By the time I arrived, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the street. 2 police cars were parked outside, officers standing near the door. I could see them exchanging glances, confused by the scene they had walked into. I stayed back at first, watching from the shadows as the officers knocked and then entered the house. I didn't need to be inside to know what they were seeing. Inside, my wife's betrayal was laid bare for everyone to witness. I could hear muffled voices, commands, confusion, and then the stunned silence that followed. A minute later, the front door burst open. One of the officers, struggling to keep a straight face, waved me over. "Sir, you're going to want to see this." I stepped into the doorway, and what I saw nearly made my legs give out. There they were, my wife and those three men. The scene was as humiliating and ridiculous as it was infuriating. My wife was scrambling to cover herself with a bedsheet, her face frozen in disbelief. The three men, equally exposed, stood awkwardly, their hands raised in surrender, knowing there was no way to talk their way out of this. The officers, meanwhile, were visibly struggling not to burst out laughing. One of them bit his lip, while another turned away to cough into his hand, doing a poor job of hiding his amusement. The absurdity of the situation was too much for them to process professionally, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. My wife, on the other hand, was spiraling into panic. She clutched the sheet tighter around herself, her face contorted with horror. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was devastated. She screamed, "This isn't what it looks like," but her voice was raw with desperation. It was exactly what it looked like. Her sobs grew louder, but not once did she try to explain herself to me. There were no apologies, no excuses. She wasn't crying because of what she had done. She was crying because she had been caught. The full weight of the situation hit her all at once, and all she could do was wail uncontrollably. I felt my chest tighten, not with pity, but with anger. I'd given her everything, and this was how she had repaid me. My anger spilled out, and I shouted at them, the words tumbling from my mouth without restraint. "How could you do this to me? In our home?" I didn't care if the police were there or not. I wanted them all to hear me, to know the depth of my rage and betrayal. One of the men, still standing awkwardly beside the couch, had the nerve to mumble, "It's not that serious, man." That was the final straw. I lunged toward him, fists clenched, but the officers grabbed me, pulling me back just in time. "Calm down, sir," one of them said, though I could see him biting back a smirk. "Calm down?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fury. "Do you have any idea what they've done?" The officer holding me nodded sympathetically, though his lips twitched with amusement. "Trust me, sir. We've seen a lot of things, but this one's something else." Eventually, the officers got things under control, though not without a few stifled chuckles. They rounded up the three men and escorted them, still half-dressed, toward the patrol cars. My wife stood by the door, trembling and sobbing, too stunned to move. "Get dressed, ma'am," one of the officers said, trying and failing not to sound condescending. "You'll need to come with us." She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Wait, what? No, please," she wailed, her voice cracking. "This is all a misunderstanding." But the officers weren't interested in her excuses. They had seen enough, and so had I. Minutes later, they loaded all four of them into the patrol cars. My wife was crying hysterically now, her mascara running down her cheeks. The men, for their part, wore matching expressions of disbelief and frustration, clearly realizing that their night had taken a very unexpected turn. As the officers slammed the doors shut, one turned to me. "You'll need to come down to the station, too. We'll need a statement." I nodded, still numb from everything that had just happened. The rage inside me simmered, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of relief. The worst part was over. The lies were out in the open, and there was no going back. I climbed into my car, following the police convoy to the station, my thoughts a swirling mess. My marriage was in ruins, my heart shattered beyond repair, but at least now, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The ride to the station was quiet, but I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of resolve. This wasn't the end. Not yet. I wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The police car rattled along the road, headlights cutting through the dark as we made our way to the station. I sat in the back, beside her, the woman I once thought I knew better than anyone in the world. My wife. Or at least, what was left of her after everything I had witnessed tonight. She sat with her knees drawn up, wrapped in a police-issued blanket, still trembling. Her face was streaked with tears and smeared makeup, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The officers in the front exchanged glances, smirking, barely able to contain their amusement. One of them even turned the volume down on the police radio, as if anticipating the mess that was about to unfold between us. I couldn't hold back any longer. The anger boiled over, ripping through the silence like a blade. "Why?" I demanded, my voice raw and shaky. "Why did you do this to me? After everything, after all these years, why?" She kept her head down, sniffling, clutching the blanket as if it could protect her from the weight of my words. But she didn't answer, and that silence drove me mad. "You destroyed everything," I shouted, leaning closer to her. "Was I not enough? Were you that bored with our life? What the hell were you thinking?" Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I needed answers, needed her to say something that could make sense of the nightmare she'd dragged me into. Finally, she looked up, her eyes swollen and red. I don't love you anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. "I've felt this way for a long time. I miss being me. I miss being alive." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but the way she said it, as if it justified everything, made my blood boil. "Oh, so cheating with 3 strangers in our bed makes you feel alive, does it?" I shot back, my voice thick with rage and disbelief. "You ruined our marriage, our home. For what? For some cheap thrill?" She covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. "I didn't know what else to do," she cried. "I was so unhappy. I felt trapped. I didn't think you'd find out." At that, the officers couldn't hold it in any longer. One of them snorted, and the other coughed to hide his laughter, but they both failed miserably. Their shoulders shook, and they exchanged knowing looks, grinning like 2 kids witnessing the most absurd thing they'd seen all week. "Unbelievable," I muttered under my breath, disgusted by everyone around me, by her, by them, by the sheer absurdity of this entire situation. I stared out the window, my fists clenched on my knees, trying to keep my emotions in check. But there was no holding back the torrent of anger. "You'll regret this," I hissed, my voice low and venomous. "There will be a trial, and when it's over, you'll all pay for what you've done. Every last one of you." She buried her face in the blanket, her sobs muffled, but I could see the panic in her eyes now. For the first time, it hit her. This wasn't just a bad night. There were going to be real consequences, and I would make sure of it. The trial, justice served. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves standing in front of a judge. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers, people who had heard about the scandal and come to see the drama unfold firsthand. I sat stiffly in the front row, arms crossed, my jaw tight as I waited for the proceedings to begin. My wife sat across from me at the defendant's table, flanked by the 3 men who had been with her that night. They wore blank expressions, as if they didn't understand what the big deal was. She, however, looked small and broken, a shadow of the confident woman I had once known. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. He was a stern, no-nonsense man with a reputation for being unforgiving, and I prayed that he would see the situation for what it was, a betrayal that demanded punishment. The trial was swift. I had presented everything, the camera footage, the audio recordings, the 911 call. There was no room for denial or excuses. The men tried to claim that it had all been consensual, that they hadn't meant to cause harm, but the judge wasn't interested in their excuses. He passed judgment quickly. 2 years in jail for all of them, including my wife, along with fines that would cripple them financially. The sound of the gavel slamming down echoed through the courtroom like the final blow in a long, brutal fight. My wife collapsed in her seat, weeping uncontrollably, but I felt no pity. Not anymore. She had chosen this path. She had destroyed everything we had built together. And now, she would pay the price. Aftermath. A hollow victory. At first, I thought I would feel relief once the trial was over, maybe even closure. But as I walked out of the courthouse, I realized that the victory felt empty. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was accompanied by something else, something far worse. Sadness. Loss. I had won, yes, but in doing so, I had lost everything that mattered. My home, my marriage, my sense of peace, all gone. The silence of my empty house weighed heavily on me in the days that followed. I wandered from room to room, surrounded by the ghosts of memories that now felt like cruel reminders of what I had lost. 2 weeks passed in a fog of loneliness and regret. Every morning, I woke up hoping that the pain would dull, but it didn't. It gnawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. The victory in court had been a fleeting moment of satisfaction, but now I was left to deal with the wreckage of my life. And then one morning, I got the news I had been dreading. My wife had posted bail. A chill ran down my spine as the word sank in. She was out, free, and she wasn't going to let this go. The message played on a loop in my mind. She's out on bail. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the ticking clock on the wall becoming the loudest sound in the room. I thought the trial would be the end of it, that I'd buried everything in the courtroom. But no, now she was free, and I knew my wife. She wouldn't slink off quietly into the night. She wanted revenge. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside the window set me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, watching, waiting, and with every hour that passed, my anxiety grew. What was she planning? Would she confront me, try to take what little I had left? The thought gnawed at me. Her anger, her desperation. She was humiliated, yes, but now she was dangerous. Then it happened. It was the following Friday evening when I came home from running errands and found the front window smashed. Shards of glass glinted under the porch light, crunching beneath my shoes as I stood in disbelief. My heart pounded in my chest, and a wave of dread washed over me. I knew instantly who had done this. I stepped inside cautiously, my throat tightening as I surveyed the wreckage. Drawers had been yanked out and emptied, furniture overturned. The walls were scarred with deep scratches, and my belongings, things that had once meant something to me, were scattered everywhere like trash. She had been here. My wife had broken into my house and taken everything of value. Electronics, personal keepsakes, even clothes. What she couldn't carry, she had destroyed. My photo albums were ripped apart, memories now reduced to torn paper strewn across the floor. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. You ruined me. Now I'll ruin you. The realization hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just revenge for the trial. It was her way of reclaiming control, reminding me that no matter what I did, she would always leave a mark on my life. And the worst part? She'd succeeded. For a moment, I stood in the ruins of my home, overwhelmed by a crushing sense of defeat. What was the point of all this? The trial, the confrontation, the anger, all of it had led me here, to this hollow, broken place. I thought exposing her betrayal would give me closure. Instead, it had left me with nothing. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The final call. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking with fury, and dialed the police again. This time, there would be no trial, no leniency. I had the camera footage, the smashed windows, the stolen belongings. Evidence that couldn't be denied. When the officers arrived, they surveyed the damage with grim expressions, no longer amused by the absurdity of the situation. This was serious now. A repeat offender, someone who had escalated from betrayal to criminal behavior. They took my statement carefully, documenting every shattered window and stolen item. "Don't worry," one of the officers said as he closed his notebook. "With her prior record in this break-in, she won't be able to post bail again. She's looking at serious time now." And just like that, it was over, or so I hoped. The weight of freedom. In the weeks that followed her arrest, the house felt even quieter than before, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of everything that had happened. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. I sold the house, unable to live in a place haunted by memories of betrayal. Every room felt tainted, every object a reminder of the life that had crumbled before my eyes. I packed what little I had left and moved to a quiet town far from where it all began. People talk about closure like it's a finish line you cross, a moment when everything suddenly makes sense and the pain disappears. But I've learned the hard way that closure isn't neat or satisfying. It's messy. It leaves scars. And as much as I wanted to believe that putting her behind bars would free me from the pain, it didn't. The betrayal still lingers, like a dull ache that never quite goes away. But I'm learning to live with it, one day at a time. She's gone now, locked away where she can't hurt me anymore. And for the first time in a long while, I feel something close to peace. It's not perfect, but it's enough. I'll carry the scars of this betrayal for the rest of my life. But at least now, I know the truth. And sometimes, that's the best you can hope for.